You're listening to Foreword, a podcast from faculty at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, hosted by Michelle Knight, Josh Jipp, Madison Pierce, and James Arcadi. Foreword invites listeners into the mission of Trinity Evangelical Divinity School through conversations with faculty, staff, and guests.
Hey everyone, I'm James Arcadi.
And I'm Madison Pierce. Hey y'all.
You know, we're coming up on Halloween, Madison. I don't know if you ever had any cool Halloween costumes, maybe when you were in your younger days, that you might want to share with our listeners and viewers.
I mean, I did all the classics. Like I was a witch one year. I think I was a cat. Pretty standard. But maybe my most interesting one is that I was Queen Nefertiti. Which I do kind of feel like is on brand. Like it was just weird enough, like, powerful woman, like all the, historical figure, all of that. Sure. I had like a big gold, like cylindrical hat that was made out of cardboard. So my mom sews and is pretty crafty. So I felt like, sky's the limit with my costumes. She's putting together one for Isla this year and stuff. So we're lucky in that way.
So I remember a few costumes. I think maybe one of my favorite ones was, it was in high school. I was a Jawa from Star Wars. And what was cool about this outfit is like there was no part of me that was visible. So it had like this black thing that went over my face. So, kind of a mesh sort of screen and with a hood over it and gloves and everything. And so, I walked around school that day.
That's incredible.
But then when trick-or-treating time came, okay, this is when I got a little bit, a little naughty or something. I sat on my porch with a bowl of candy in my lap. All right. And you couldn't tell if I was like, a stuffed creature, like a scarecrow or something like that, or if it was just me. And so I totally did the thing where like, older kids would come up to get candy because it's just there in my lap in a bowl. And I wouldn't grab them or jump out. I would just kind of like move forward a little bit and just, scared some adolescents probably in my neighborhood. So that was a fun one.
That so that's my nightmare, first of all, because I'm scared of one thing. Like I have a really irrational phobia. And I know it's irrational, but I probably shouldn't tell anybody this, but I'm scared of wax people.
People.
And people like in statues and stuff like that to a degree, because when I was younger, actually, like I went to Madame Tussauds and hallucinated like that they were moving and stuff. And so like a person that I don't think is going to moving is like my number one fear. Like that would paralyze me.
I'm sorry to like bring up these fears to you.
No, I mean, until that part of the story, I was like, James as a Jawa, like I love James and I like him twice as much just because I know he's been a Jawa. So I love that. Yeah. That's an amazing costume.
There was some just good fun Star Wars kind of adventures in the first part of the day, but then a little bit entertaining your fears, I guess. I don't know if that's irrational. That actually sounds kind of rational, because those wax figures are, they're not quite. Yeah, I can sympathize or empathize with that situation.
I'm not scared of heights. I'm not scared of spiders or snakes. I'm scared of wax people. So, but anyways.
Well, no wax people on this episode here. No. Actually, real live people talking together. You, me, and Dr. Harold Netland. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with him.
Yep, let's go see Harold.
Welcome to Foreword, a TEDS faculty podcast. We're so excited that you're joining with us today to have a conversation with Dr. Harold Netland. Dr. Netland is a longtime member of the faculty at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. I believe been on the faculty since 1993. So a lot of experiences here at TEDS to share and chat about. Dr. Netland is a professor of the philosophy of religion as well as intercultural studies. So he sort of resides in two departments on campus, and I'll be excited to kind of hear a little bit more about how that intersection works. Prior to TEDS, Dr. Netland did missions work in Japan. He also did his PhD at Claremont University out in California. And if I understand correctly, he's also a graduate of my alma mater, Biola University, maybe Biola College back then, if that's right. So anyway, Dr. Netland, Harold, we're excited for you to be here with us. And I think we'll just be eager to hear a bit more about some of your experiences.
Well, thanks. It's good to be with you.
Great. Thanks, Harold. Well, maybe you could just say a bit more about some of your background and sort of like what kind of led you into academic study, what kind of led you into ministry, how you ended up here at TEDS, and kind of a little bit more about just, what's brought you to the point in your career where you are now.
Let me give a quick overview, and then if you want to pick up on anything, feel free to do that. But there's a lot involved in that question. I was actually born in Japan. My parents were missionaries, so until age 18, most of my life was in Japan. And then from age 18, for the next 11 years, I was pretty much in Southern California. Biola, it was Biola College, and I can still remember the name change. And somehow Biola University just didn't sound right, but that's what happened. After 11 years in Southern California, my wife and I then returned to Japan for just about 10 years. And we worked with the Evangelical Free Church and did a variety of things, university student work, helped out in church planting, and then taught at Tokyo Christian University. I was able to be a part of the establishment of that. It was 3 separate schools that came together to form one theological college in Tokyo, and so spent about 4 years there. Then came in the summer of '93 to the States, and that's not what we had planned on. When Ruth and I went to Japan, we fully expected, all right, we'll be here till we retire, and then find a place back in the States somewhere, sit in our rocking chairs. And so 10 years after going to Japan, we ended up here at TEDS. I had never lived in the Midwest. I'd been through O'Hare, but that was about the extent of my Midwest experience.
Sure.
Never been to TEDS. And it was really, I suppose, David Hesselgrave, who was a missions professor at the time, and Walt Kaiser, who was dean at the time. They started a conversation that went on over a number of years, and Ruth and I finally came to the point where we felt this is what the Lord had in mind for us. And now we've been here in our 27th year, so it really goes fast. It's not what we had in mind when we, as young adults, we're looking at the future and thinking, okay, so what's the next 30, 40 years going to be like? But you learn to hold the future loosely and follow God where He leads. And it's just been a terrific 25 plus years here at TEDS.
That's amazing, Harold. I think we'll probably come back around to some of your experiences in Japan in a little bit, but you raised this kind of idea of institutional memory, and you have a lot of it here at TEDS. I mean, I think, as you said, you've been here since 1993.
Yes.
So I think, James and I are relative newcomers to TEDS. I'd love to hear some of what you think, some of the ways that you've seen our institution I don't know what we've been consistent in, some of the ways that we've progressed or changed over the years. I mean, what has your experience been like here?
Yeah, good. Well, when I came, I was the second youngest faculty member. There was one other person who was younger than I, and clearly that's no longer the case. The school did not provide computers when I came. I had this big clunky Mac Plus. I don't know if you've ever seen those. And I had to bring my own machine into the office. And Jim Moore, I think it was probably my third year here, finally got money out of the dean's office so that we could, each faculty member could have their own computer. So technology has changed, and TEDS has been fairly cautious in how it has approached technology and online learning. And probably overall that's been good, although we've been forced to do a lot more of this in the last year, obviously. But Madison and James, I mean, for you coming in and seeing where we are now at TEDS, believe me, I mean, it was a dark ages back then. How has it changed? The fundamental commitments have not changed. And that to me is just amazing. So as you go through the distinctives of TEDS, training pastors, training scholars, commitment to personal piety, commitment to the life of the intellect. Kind of a mainstream evangelical institution, not off on the left, not off on the right. Those commitments have been there. I would like to think that we're more engaged with society and culture now than when I first came. I think that's the case. And in some ways, we have a more diverse faculty than we did back then, although it's always been diverse in terms of theological commitments and approaches to scholarship and whatnot. But the important things have stayed the same. And it's still a wonderful place to be.
Can I just follow up briefly on how you sort of seen more recent engagement culturally, or maybe more in sort of other aspects, I don't know, socially, culturally that maybe weren't as much when you were first here at TEDS?
I think back then, the idea was, biblical studies, you do biblical studies. You do exegesis, biblical interpretation. And theology, you do theology. And then the missions department, that's the place, or practical theology. That's where you go if you want to engage society. What's the relationship between the gospel and culture? Okay, those are discussions for people over there. That's no longer the case. And you have people in biblical studies using tools and resources from sociological analysis, cultural anthropology. You have people in theology who are engaging a broader spectrum of issues, social justice type issues, and the interface between society and culture and how that shapes the practice and the doing of theology. It used to be much more segmented, I think, and compartmentalized. So, to be honest, we're not where I'd like to be on this, but I think we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
That's great.
I agree. Yeah.
I mean, I'm wondering if I can... Oh, go ahead. No,
yeah, please.
Madison.
No, I was just going to say, I'm probably being distracting. Those of you that are listening at home cannot see this, but my eyes are watering, and so I'm wiping it, but I'm not crying. But anyways,
I didn't want to make you cry this early already, Madison.
I mean, your devotion to TEDS, Madison, is very commendable.
This is such a beautiful picture.
Quite moving, huh? Yeah.
Go ahead, James.
Yeah, well, Harold, I mean, on that point, I'm kind of curious, your own, in thinking about that kind of it's sort of segmentation and disciplines and interdisciplinary work and kind of movement more towards whether it's cultural engagement or cross-disciplinary conversation and engagement. You yourself, to me at least, seem like the picture of interdisciplinary. I mean, even the fact you have a joint appointment in my department, our department, the Department of Biblical and Systematic Theology, but also in intercultural studies and missions. So I guess I'm kind of curious for yourself, how did you come to this intersection point, and how do you see that intersection point between philosophy of religion and missions, as has been so apparent in your life and career?
Yeah, good question. Let me just tell the background a little bit here.
Sure.
When it works well, it works well. If it doesn't work well, then you're homeless. Yeah, intellectually homeless.
Yeah.
But I did my undergrad at Biola. I was a history major. I loved history. And I thought I would go on in history. I started out doing church history at the School of Theology, United Methodist School at Claremont there. But I found my interest moving from history to philosophy. So the history of philosophy, intellectual history. And the word philosophy kind of scared me at the time. This was late 70s, 1980.
Yeah.
It was not at all like today. Philosophy was very hostile to any kind of religious perspective, especially Orthodox Christians. And but I found my interest continually moving in that direction. And I ended up studying at the Talbot School of Theology at Claremont and then at Fuller, although I didn't take a degree from any of them. I was very much trying to chart my own course. So I tell students, do as I say, don't do as I did. Finish the program. But I was trying to put together my own education and what interested me. And then I ended up in the philosophy program at Claremont Graduate School. John Hick had just come. I had read his material, and I wanted to study with him, and so that's where I ended up. And I loved it. It was terrific. So that became my academic home, or my disciplinary home base. But I'd grown up in Japan as a missionary kid.
Yeah.
And I was working in Southern California with international students. And so Monday through Friday, I'd be, doing seminars and studying and all this esoteric stuff. Then on the weekends, I'd go down to LA and be involved with international student ministries. And so I kept that foot in practical ministry and outreach. By the time I was finishing my doctoral program, I really felt the Lord was calling me back to Japan. But there weren't a lot of models for PhDs in philosophy in missions. And so I struggled with that. And Ruth, my wife, and I felt called to some kind of university student work in Japan, and that's where we headed out. I have found that the Lord brought together in a beautiful way that training in philosophy and religious studies with the experience in Japan. And it's not that, Bible studies I was leading with businessmen. They would ask me about some esoteric philosophical question, but the training, the way to think, the way to deal with tough questions and whatnot, this was enormously helpful. And so I began to kind of put things together on my own, so to speak. And now, since coming to TEDS, initially, Walt Kaiser, they had an opening in missions, and he said, well, we'd like you to consider coming in missions. And my first response was, I'd be bored silly if I spent all my time teaching missions. I mean, can you imagine anything more boring? And so I said, well, I'd really like to kind of work across disciplines, do something in philosophy of religion, world religions, as well as missions. I could see something like that. And he didn't bat an eye. He said, great, let's talk about it. Now, after I've been here for 25 years, I see how unusual that is, and in some ways how crazy it is. I mean, it's hard enough to keep up in one discipline, let alone try to integrate. But my own personal feeling is we need much more integration across disciplines. We've become too siloed, too segmented, and there's something really healthy about having to learn the vocabulary, the language of another discipline, and how to frame questions outside your own guild. that was a long answer to your question, James.
Well, it's a complicated situation, it sounds like, but I mean, that seems really rich to me.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate that, Harold, a lot. And I in going back through some of your work in preparation for this, was struck by the fact that you so frequently do co-authored work, that you're collaborating a lot. And I wonder if that also kind of plays into this question of you trying to navigate a lot of different disciplines and then, being a really hospitable colleague. So I think that's a neat kind of, key, aspect of your work as well. I don't know if you want to jump in there and say something about that, but.
I've enjoyed it. I've also found it's a lot more difficult working with another author than just doing it on your own. But I hope the end product is richer and better for that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that you've also done quite a bit in terms of, so this is jumping ahead a little bit to some of the work that you've done or some of the topics that you've covered. And one of them is religious pluralism. Yeah. And so, we can set aside Christianity as, entirely unique, and that is, of course, a kind of loaded term in some of these discussions. Or we can say that all religions effectively, lead in the same direction. So could you tell us a little bit about your understanding of how Christianity relates to other religions?
Yeah. Well, I distinguish between Christianity and other religions and the gospel and other religions because Christianity, it's a loaded term. But the way we normally use it, it refers to an empirical Christian tradition that has a history and a location. So when we evangelicals use the word Christianity, we often mean the gospel, the pure gospel. And of course, my church has a pure gospel. But when others hear the word Christianity, they think of the history of the actual church, actual Christians throughout the ages. And that's a very mixed reality, positive and negative. So the last book I wrote, I put Christianity in the title because I really wanted to talk about that. It's not just the gospel, it's this very messy empirical reality, the church, throughout 2,000 years. What's the relationship between this and other religions? The gospel and other religions is really the key question for me. And the question that I really think we need to grapple with today, and the American church really needs to explore more carefully, is what does it mean to be disciples of Jesus in a world that is ethnically, religiously very diverse, and at this moment in history where you have the legacy of 2,000 years of the empirical Christian church. So what does it mean for us today to be disciples of Jesus here and now?
Yeah.
And that's a complicated question.
Yeah, I've heard you talk a lot about preparing our students for the coming decades. And now you're starting to talk about the 20s and 30s, which always strikes me a little bit. I mean, are we like firmly in the roaring 20s again? I don't know.
Oh, my.
It's been roaring this year.
Oh, yeah.
On many levels.
Yes. Harold, could you tell us a little bit about what that looks like? I mean, what is your vision for theological education that prepares the next generation, either, doing that ministry or shaping those ministers?
Oh, boy. Well, I think TEDS has the right commitments when it comes to trying to position ourselves as a middle evangelical institution. I think that's important. It's easy to fall into extremes, right, left, whatever. I think we need to be training for the church, pastors, effective men and women who have the skills to deal with people. We also need to be training scholars. And so I want to affirm what we're doing at TEDS on that score. I think we do very well in the biblical languages, training people how to open up the Word, understand the Word, teach the Word, think theologically. But what I consistently hear from alumni, and what I sense personally as I look at society and where we're headed, is there's a big disconnect between what the graduates feel equipped to do and how they make the connections with what's happening on the ground.
Interesting.
And I think we're doing better. But I really do feel the white evangelical church in America today is at a crossroads. And I see much of what's going on in the broader white evangelical church. And I know I'm painting with very broad strokes. I know that. But I think there's a sense of trying to hold on to what we think we had in the past. I don't think we ever had it. But there's this vision of what they think the past was like. They see the present and the future. And I think many evangelicals are scared. Where is this going? And how should we try to recover what we used to have? In my view, that's precisely the wrong way to approach these issues. And so a short answer would be, I think pastors, Christian leaders in the American church today, not only whites, but I'm thinking primarily about white leaders, really need to think missiologically about where we are today. So if you go to another culture, then it's kind of expected you study the society, the language, the culture. You try not to offend anybody. You look for bridges that you can build and so on. And my comment is simply, why don't we do that here? The society is changing. The culture is changing. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. So the question becomes, at this moment, how do we live as salt and light, disciples of Jesus?
Yeah, amen.
Yeah, that's really cool. Thanks for that, Harold. It's kind of another intersection point that I was thinking about in terms of your own work and even what you're working on right now. So as I understand it, you're working on a book on the intersection of, I guess, epistemology and religious experience, and obviously, and here's a cool place where intercultural studies and missiology intersects with philosophy. So, can you say a little bit about what is a religious experience, and how are you kind of thinking about that with respect to the epistemological issues that you're investigating?
Well, my son-in-law is a surfer. So you catch the right wave, and that's a religious experience, Okay, it's pretty broad.
I've caught that wave.
You caught that wave.
As someone who's never lived in California, I'm feeling a little bit left out right now.
Yeah.
I'm just joking.
Well, come at it this way.
Yeah.
Historically, I think from the time of the Reformation reacting against the magisterium, the Roman Catholic Church, the institutional authority in the Roman Catholic Church, there clearly is a move towards a more personal experience of God through the Holy Spirit and the Word. You have Pietism, you have the Puritans, you have Jonathan Edwards, John Wesley, contemporaries.
Sure.
One of the most interesting parts of the book for me was doing kind of a comparative study of Edwards and Wesley on how they approached this issue of religious experience, because within the Christian framework, they both are counting on and appealing to the work of the Holy Spirit in an individual's life to accomplish all kinds of things. But they're also both very much aware that not everything that seems to be the work of the Spirit really is the work of the Spirit. And so they're both very sensitive to basic epistemological questions, although they're working within a Christian theological framework. That personal experiential dimension has been a big part of evangelicals over the past few centuries. Now, when Ruth and I were in Japan, My wife was pregnant with our first daughter. This would be the early 80s. And we lived in a part of outside of Tokyo, west of Tokyo, where there really weren't any other Americans. And one day she had gone to the maternity clinic and came back, and she was all excited. Oh, you'll never believe who I met at the clinic today. Well, it was another American. Turns out she was also from Minnesota. My wife was. She was a graduate of the University of Minnesota. My wife was. And so they set up a time to have coffee. And Ruth was all excited. Oh, good. We get to talk about America and Minnesota and all that kind of stuff. I was gone when the woman came, but my wife told me no sooner had she entered the door than she said to my wife, let me tell you how I found perfect peace and happiness in Soka Gakkai Buddhism. And she was actually a ward director for Soka Gakkai Buddhism in that part of Tokyo. Now, it turns out at the U of M, she had met a Japanese international student, fell in love, they got married. He was a Buddhist, she converted. And my wife said her testimony was beautiful. I mean, you change a few words and it would have been a spectacular Christian testimony. And there are lots of these kinds of experiences. So bring it to a close. Experience is very important. And I think there's an epistemological framework in which we can trust in a fallibilist manner our experiences. But you've got to go beyond simply the experience and have some broader framework from within which you can assess experiences, whether they are veridical or not, or else you'll end up like Ruth was with this woman. Wow, that's beautiful. Good for you. So that's part of what motivated me to get into this discussion. And then the 7 chapters, it's not a definitive statement. It's much more exploratory, but trying to chart a way in which we can, within the Christian tradition, look at some of these basic epistemological issues and have a responsible framework for understanding them.
So is the idea trying to operate within Christianity? How do you think about religious experiences? Or is it more of kind of a comparison of different traditions, different faiths and their religious experiences, and how a Christian ought to think about that? How a Christian ought to think about, the person your wife encountered? Or is it more, how do I think as a Christian about my own religious experiences?
It's both, but it's, I started out thinking I would do a comparative study. Experience in Buddhism and experience in Christianity. And I just found right away, I mean, the literature is just massive, and that's not going to happen. So I focus it mainly on theistic experiences of a theistic God, broadly within the Christian tradition. But there are theistic experiences outside of explicitly the Christian tradition. One of the fascinating things to me is how many reports there are of visions of Jesus, appearances, apparitions of Jesus, by just a wide assortment of people. And so it's written with the Christian audience in mind. But in addressing these issues, for example, there's a chapter on mysticism there. And I look primarily at Hindu, Buddhist discussions, and not at the Christian mystical tradition, simply because of time. But so there's a little bit of comparison going on, but it's primarily for those within the broadly Christian tradition. How should we approach and assess theistic experiences?
That sounds really rich, really helpful.
Yeah, that's great, Harold. And when and where can we find this?
That's a very good question. It's supposed to be done by Christmas, TBD. So I need to turn the manuscript in before Christmas, and then probably it'll be a year or so after that before it's out. Yeah, Baker Academic is putting it out.
Oh, Baker. Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good. That's wonderful. We're about to wrap, Harold, but I think it's really interesting. I don't know if this is how you would frame this too, so please feel free to push back. But I hear a lot in your work is a theme of kind of, looking at people's own perceptions and then helping them to understand where those might be misconceptions and then kind of reframing those things. And I really appreciate that, because I think that is an important part of our kind of contemporary work, is to say, you know what, this is what we think is true of God. This is what it seems like people think is true of God. And we've got to bridge those two things. I think that's a really important part of our work. And it sounds like that's kind of a thread in what you're doing as well. So I'm glad to join in, or join with you in that, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that's a good observation. And I think there's a need for that. And I went from a very conservative undergraduate institution. Biola back then is not like Biola when you were there. Yeah. It was more of a fundamentalist school. I went from there to the School of Theology at Claremont, which is pushing the edge for left-wing thinking. And one of the first lessons I learned was they misunderstand us just like we misunderstand them. And and then in Japan, too, I found misunderstandings all around. And so trying to overcome misunderstandings, where do we agree? Where do we disagree? You don't compromise. You hold fast to your convictions. But can we get beyond unhelpful stereotypes and really see where the other person is coming from and then deal with things on that basis? It's important, I think.
Yeah, incredibly important. Yeah, definitely. And a great place for us to wrap up. So thanks so much, Harold, for chatting with us today. Really excited about the work that you've been doing over the decades at TEDS. Grateful to be inheriting, in some sense, if I can use that term, the work that you've done at TEDS. And really excited about some of the things that are coming out in your research and your publication and in your teaching as well. So thanks so much. Good to have you with us today.
Well, thank you.
And that's just the foreword. We're really grateful to Harold Netland for speaking with us today. If you're interested in learning more about Dr. Netland, you can check out his webpage on the TIU site. You'll see that he teaches in a variety of our programs here at TEDS, including the Masters of Divinity program, various MA programs, and of course our PhD program. So we're thankful to him for being with us today. We're always thankful to our producer, Curtis Pierce, and our graduate assistant, Lauren Januzik. And we're of course grateful to you, our listeners, for joining with us in these conversations. I'm James Arcadi.
And I'm Madison Pierce. Thanks, y'all.
Foreword is a podcast hosted by faculty at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. You can subscribe to our newest episodes on your preferred podcast app or at forewordpodcast.com. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Foreword Podcast to get updates and additional links to content. Trinity Evangelical Divinity School is located 25 miles north of Chicago, with extension sites across the country and online. Trinity educates men and women to engage in God's redemptive work in the world by cultivating academic excellence, Christian faithfulness, and lifelong learning. You can find more information at teds.edu.